Hi,
Hello,
mabuhay.
mabuhay. Good day, everyone.
I am Jennifer Javiti Julian,
And I am Harold P. Labrador,
and for today's video, we will be discussing.
Pointillism.
So sit back
Relax.
and enjoy as we start the discussion. Mr. Labrador, go on.
We're going to tackle about the definition of pointillism, brief background history of pointillism, characteristics of pointillism, and pointillist painters and notable artworks, and lastly, importance of pointillism.
So now let's discuss what pointillism is. The term pointillism comes from the French word point, which means dot, and refers to a neo-impressionism painting technique in which small distinct dots of pure color are applied to the canvas or another medium to achieve maximum luminosity. So from the word itself, pointillism refers to a painting technique involving a composition of dotted colors to form a visual. So instead of strides of brush strokes, the art form appears static with a plethora of unblended small circles. Pointillists apply color directly onto the canvas using the square or round touches of the paintbrush instead of mixing them on a palette as traditionally done. Unlike some art movements, pointillism has nothing to do with the subject matter of the painting. It is a specific way of applying the paint to the canvas. So in pointillism, the painting is made up entirely of small dots of pure color. And the artist fitted together variations of similar shades to deepen the complexities of color, such as blue and orange, while providing ample breathing space to give the paintings a smooth appearance. Next slide, please. So the eye and mind of the viewer mix the colors to make different shades. So when viewed from afar, the result of this technique meant that the viewer's mind and eye would be able to blur the dots together in order to create a detailed image. So this optical mixing also displayed images that had a more complete and vivid range of hues than what the singular dots were able to provide alone. Close up, it is hard to see a clear image, but when seen from a distance, a whole image of the subject painted can be seen. So, parang yung TV screens natin, nag-work siya in the same way. Tiny pixel blend together to form a whole image. So next, it was born from the movement known as Neo-Impressionism, which occurred from 1880 to 1910. So kapag sinabi nating Neo-Impressionism, it is the name given to the post-impressionist work of George Seurat, Paul Signac, and their followers who, inspired by optical theory, painted using tiny adjacent dabs of primary color to create the effect of light. So Neo-Impressionism is inspired by the sciences of optics and color to create a new painting technique. In Pointillism, the understanding of a painting goes hand in hand with the capacity or optical condition of the viewer to observe the mixture of color that the distribution of colored dots on the canvas can generate. So Neo-Impressionism was promoted by the post-impressionist artist George Seurat and his student Paul Signac. So next, Felix Finion, a French art critic, is credited with creating the name peinture au point or painting by dots to depict Seurat's work in a review, though originally Seurat himself preferred the word divisionism or chromoluminarism. So, any meaningful conversation of pointillism will, in all likelihood, include a mention of divisionism and maybe even chromoluminarism. So, as painting techniques or theories, they are interrelated and sometimes used interchangeably. But sabi ng mga art historians, may distinction. Pointillism refers to the specific use of small separate dots of color on the canvas. This is how it differs from divisionism, which is broader and refers to any division or artistic separation of color from small brush strokes. Furthermore, divisionism starts from the fundamental principle of painting separate colors in the form of dots or patches in such a way that they interact at an optical level. That is, they can be mixed in the view of the audience or the viewer. So it is from this point that the principles of Neo-Impressionism are based to give rise to Pointillism. Next. So now I will discuss to you the creation of Pointillism. So Pointillism has its origin from Neo-Impressionism, an artistic movement that originated in France with the influence of Impressionism and inspired by the technique of Divisionism. So gaya nga ng sabi ko, hindi siya pareha sa Divisionism. Parang yung Pointillism, na-inspire lang siyang mangyari dahil sa technique or style of painting na Divisionism. So, Neo-Impressionism was promoted by the Frenchman Georges Seurat, 1859 to 1891, whose works are characterized by being figures and landscapes. So, si Georges Seurat ang nag-promote ng Neo-Impressionism. So, Georges Seurat used the science of optics to figure out that if tiny dots of pure color were painted closer together, the human eye would blend the dots to form a solid color. So, si George Hura, inanalyze niya yung effects that color components could generate by placing them side by side in the form of small dots. From here, the new technique of pointillism begins to emerge, which would be one of the great areas of Neo-Impressionism. So this is a style that is complemented by the interaction between the viewer or the audience and the work. In other words, the pointillist work complements itself and generates its effects only if the viewer is able to perceive the optical effect, either due to a distance or visual abilities. Pero mas maganda pag sa distance, mas makikita mo yung ganda nung artwork. And this relatively new and unique practice oblige the viewers to step backward and see the art as a whole. So sabi ko nga, mas maganda kapag mas malayo. The eyes did the work of merging the dotty colors in a wide chromatic range. So, the farther the distance from the painting, the more complete it appeared to be. Hence, it was thought to be a very scientific approach to art and depicted an almost mastered sense of illusion. So after the contributions of Sura and his new scientific way of implementing color, his student and follower Paul Signac continued the path traced by his teacher, becoming one of the greatest exponents of Neo-Impressionism and who also helped the development of Pointillism. So, nag-combine or parang si George Sura at Paul Signac yung dalawang tao na nag-develop sa technique na to. And then, next slide please. So, Pointillism developed in response to the dominant popular movement of Impressionism. Pointillism stood out from other Impressionist art techniques because it required artists to take a far more scientific approach. So, Impressionism was still largely based on the subjective opinions of individual artists at the time, which many artists who sought a new art technique did not agree with. So many other notable French, Belgian, and Italian artists were leading members of the Pointillist group, in addition to Georges Seurat and Paul Signac. Maximilien Luz and Henry Edmond Cross, two of their fellow Frenchmen, were among these artists. Other painters such as Vincent van Gogh and Pablo Picasso experimented with the pointillist style briefly during their careers. So later on, ilan sa mga artist na ito ay madidiscuss namin. So next slide please. So pointillism was very scientific and technical approach since it attempted to imitate how light and color were perceived. This meant that painters using this approach needed to know where to place their dots concerning their other color spots for their images to form appropriately later on. Therefore, Pointillism is undoubtedly an innovative art technique that requires observation, patience, and a predetermined picture in a painter's mind of what the final picture would look like disintegrated. It was starkly different from other art movements and was hence met with disapproval and much criticism initially. So pointillism has had a significant impact on later painting trends. This ranged from the late 19th century to the avant-garde stage of the 20th century. So while the pointillist method was predominantly belonged exclusively with the post-impressionist movement, it also influenced the subsequent development of cubism and pop art. So many painters still employ this remarkable approach in their work today when considering modern art trends. So sa mga art exhibition ngayon, nakikita ko pa rin na sobrang daming gumagamit ng technique na to and sobrang gaganda nila. So next. So may I call on Mr. Harold Labrador to discuss the characteristics of pointillism. Mr. Labrador, go on.
So ayan, so pointillism has a few unique characteristics that distinguish it from other painting techniques. So here are some basic characteristics of pointillism. Sorry for the background noise. So first is the pixelated aesthetics. Pointillism employs tiny dots of color to blur an image together. So similar to how pixels pick up an image in a photograph or a computer screen. So they are both similar in their photograph or computer screen. Pag zoom natin kasi yung isang photograph, makikita natin doon yung mga maliliit na square or dots, and that they call a pixel. So I said a while ago that they're both similar because in pointillism naman is they use dots of color to blur an image together. So next one is the unmixed colors. Each dot of color within a pointillist painting is pure pigment, which means pigments are the raw material of painting and art. They are insoluble particles that impart color and some degree of hiding power over the surface to which they are applied, which means the colors are unmixed. Rather than blending colors together on the canvas to create effects like shadowing or depth, distinct points of pure color are placed next to one another in patterns to mimic the way an image looks in real life. Next one. So precise application. So exactly or sharply defined or stated pointillism takes precise planning and application because each contrasting color contributes to the optical illusion of an image with mixed colors. Next one is the pointillism was an impressionist inspired technique that looked to reinvent the way landscapes, portraits, and seascapes were painted within the neo-impressionist movement. Its name was influenced by art critic Franz Fignon, who first used the expression painting by dots when attempting to describe this curious style of painting. So Pointillism is one of the most popular movements of avant-garde art from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and helped pave the way for the development of the Fauvist and Surrealist movements. It was characterized by its excessive use of color, as artists used different pigments to create the same shade of color without blending them. So next, we're going to talk about the six pointillist painters. So there have been only a few truly famous pointillist artists in a history. Here are some of the most famous pointillist painters. May I call on Miss Jennifer Jevi Hoyan?
So yan. Now, let's talk about George Seurat. So Georges Seurat is a painter, founder of the 19th century French school of Neo-Impressionism, whose technique for portraying the play of light using tiny brush strokes of contrasting colors became known as pointillism. Yung dinidiscuss natin ngayon. So rather than blending colors together on his palette, he dabbed tiny strokes or points of pure color onto the canvas. When he placed colors side by side, they would appear to blend when viewed from a distance, producing luminous, shimmering color effects through optical mixing. So this method, called pointillism, is showcased in major works of the 1880s, such as A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, that we'll also discuss later on. So Sura was also interested in the science behind the art, and he did a good deal of reading on perception, color theory, and the psychological power of line and form. So two books that affected his development as an artist were Principles of Harmony and Contrast of Colors, written by chemist Michel Eugene Chevreul, and Essay on the Unmistakable Signs of Art by painter-writer Humbert de Superville. So Sura's career was cut short when he died of illness on March 29, 1891 in Paris. Sura's paintings and artistic theories influenced many of his contemporaries, from Paul Signac to Vincent van Gogh to symbolist artists. So his monumental A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, now at the Art Institute of Chicago, is considered an iconic work of late 19th century art. So he's a great artist talaga. Now let's talk about Paul Signac. So Paul Signac was a French painter who, with Georges Seurat, developed the technique called Pointillism. So when he was 18, Signac gave up the study of architecture for painting and through Armand Guillaumin became a convert to the coloristic principles of Impressionism. In 1884, Signac helped found the Salon des Indépendants, an annual exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists held in Paris since 1884. There, he met Surat, whom initiated into the broken color technique of Impressionism. So the two went on to develop the method they called Pointillism, which became the basis of Neo-Impressionism. So they continued to apply pigment in minute dabs of pure color as had the Impressionists, but they adopted an exact, almost scientific system of applying the dots instead of the somewhat intuitive application of the earlier masters. So after 1886, he took part regularly in the annual Salon des Indépendants, to which he sent landscapes, seascapes, and decorative panels. So siya yung kasama ni George Seurat na nag-develop sa Pointillism. So may I call on Mr. Labrador again to discuss the next Pointillist painters.
So we're going to move Charles Angren. So the neo-impressionist artist Charles Angren used a muted palette for his pointillist works, seen specifically in his painting Couple in the Street. Though he was rejected from the National School of Fine Arts in France, he developed his own brand of pointillism by making larger brush strokes. So Theo van Rysselberg, late 19th century painter, also utilized the pointillist style of painting. So his first painting to feature the pointillist dot technique was his portrait of Alice Day in 1888. So next one is Maximilien Luz. So he's a French painter. Maximilien Luz began using the pointillist technique in the late 19th century, though his depictions appeared more lush and passionate than Georges Seurat, who inspired him. Morning Interior 1890 and The Port of Saint-Tropez in 1892 are two of Luz's more well-known artworks. So let's move on to the last pointillist painters, Henry Edmund Cross. Henry Edmund Cross is one of the masters of Neo-Impressionism who was directly influenced by Camille Pissarro and Claude Monet. He co-founded the Artists Independence where he befriended fellow Neo-Impressionist artists Seurat, Ingres, and Albert Dubois Pillet, and he created a number of pointillist pieces, including La Plage de Saint-Clair in 1896 and Lourdes Sur in 1893. So let's move on to the five most notable pointillist artworks. There are few famous pointillist works of art that are featured in famous museums and galleries across the world. So here are some of those works. May I call on again Miss Jevi to discuss her part. Sorry.
So yan, thank you. So now let's explore and be amazed to the notable pointillist artworks of this great artist. The first one is A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte. So George Seurat, 1886. So George Seurat's iconic painting, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, is one of the most famous examples of the pointillist technique. So using a unique pointillism style, Seurat applied dabs of contrasting colors to create a scene of a crowd enjoying a relaxed afternoon. This most famous and influential neo-impressionist work depicts a cross-section of Paris society enjoying a Sunday afternoon in the park on an island in the Seine River just at the gates of Paris. Sunday was the time that middle-class Parisians escaped the city to enjoy the outdoors. The people primarily gather in small groups of two or three or sit alone in proximity to others. It is the relationship between these people that creates a sense of modernity, with its distance and disconnection and nervous tension that lends the work an air of mystery. So using a grid system and applying small dots of paint, Sura took 2 years to complete this large-scale painting. He went to the park often, observing and making over 60 preliminary studies, including 15 in oil. So everyone here is caught in a still poise as we can see sa artwork na ito. Except for the child in the orange dress escaping off into the trees. So tingnan natin yung artwork na yan. The man on the far left playing a trombone and the furious little dog at the lower right. However, it seems a stillness that might burst into movement at any moment, just as the upper half of the painting moves into sunlight and the boats in the distance cut across the river. While Sura invoked classical and Egyptian figures, some have interpreted the overall static effect of the composition and the stiffness of the poses as a critique of the artificiality of modern society and the boredom of middle-class life. So it was a Sunday. It was Sunday, rather afternoon. So next. Next one is the Happy Family created by Pablo Picasso in 1917. So the Happy Family is one of the Pablo Picasso's few works from his Cubist period that uses the pointillism method, despite the fact that he only dabbed with it briefly, since of course he is inclined in Cubism and he's indeed one of the greatest and most influential artists of the 20th century and the creator of Cubism, one of the creator of Cubism. So dito, Picasso depicts a family situation in the painting by using a variety of clashing colors and fine points. So yung nasa ating I mean yung pinapakita niya is a family situation. Yan. Next. Next is the self-portrait by Camille Pissarro that was made in 1903. So obviously, this painting is Camille Pissarro since it is a self-portrait. From middle age onwards, the artist grew a long white beard, prompting acquaintances at cafes to greet him with Hail Moses. This piece demonstrates the artist's ability to create impact with bright colors and structure. So it is the artist's final self-portrait painted in his place, Dauphine apartment, which overlooks the Pont Neuf. It's painted with a dabbing brushstroke, which is typical of this impressionist artist's work. Pissarro was a modest and self-critical guy with strong creative and political convictions that impacted many subsequent painters. Perhaps his hair of personal authority might be detected in this portrait. Pissarro began to experience financial security at the end of his life, and in 1903, the year he completed this artwork, yung self-portrait, he got official recognition when the Louvre purchased two of his paintings. So next, may I call on Mr. Labrador?
So the fourth one is the anti-growth of Vincent van Gogh in 1887. So Vincent van Gogh's depiction of an overgrown forest area uses the classic techniques of pointillism, with colored dots creating light, shading, and contrast. So in Paris, Van Gogh experimented with the pointillist stippling technique. This woodland scene is a good example. Yun yung nakikita niyo sa screen niyo ngayon. So he covered the entire canvas with small dots of paint. The result is a plate of light and shadow on the ground between the trees, and the strip of yellow in the middle suggests the sunlight of a clearing in the distance. So along with the tree trunk on the right, it brings depth to the scene. So Van Gogh drew his strength from nature. Sometimes it's precisely those spots where one no longer feels anything of what's known as the civilized world. Sometimes it's precisely those spots that one needs to achieve calm. So next one is the loose kami at ay loose kami a bulut. So Henry Matisse's painting Luz Kami a Bulut features short, brushy strokes in intense, surreal colors that became the signature look of a blossoming art trend known as Fauvism. So Matisse made this painting in the south of France, in the town of the Saint-Tropez, while vacationing with family and friends. He created the forms in the painting, the human figures, tree bush, sea, and sky from spots of color applied with quick, firm, repeating brushstrokes with which he built up the pictures. So Matisse favored discrete strokes of color that emphasize the painted surface over the naturalistic portrayal of a scene. So he also used a palette of pure, high-tone primary colors to render the landscape and outline the figures in blue. The painting takes its title, which means richness, calm, and pleasure, from a line by 19th century poet by Charles Baudelaire, and it shares the poem's subject, escape an imaginary tranquil refuge. So, Matisse, who was uninterested in conflict and politics, once said, "What I dream of is an art of balance, of purity and serenity, devoid of troubling or depressing subject matters." So the balance and serenity he strove for in this early painting would remain consistent in his work for the rest of his career. So let's move on to the importance of pointillism. So the importance of pointillist style is that you can, in theory, use more vivid and pure color in your painting. You will all appreciate that the more you mix pure colors, the less saturated they become. With pointillism, you should negate this by using small dots of pure color to give the illusion of a different color. So the result can be stunning vibration between the different colors, but there is a compromise to this, as I will discuss below. So while the pointillism movement is in a way based on misconceptions about color, there is much to learn from the movement which you can apply to your own paintings. One of the things I noticed about pointillist painting is how the color vibrates. This is because the distinct dots of color are only partially blending in our eyes, resulting in a visual dance between all the competing colors. You do not need to paint in a full pointillist style in order to use some of the benefits of it. For example, if you are painting a landscape, you may want to employ the pointillist style to create a sense of depth in a large area of grass. But does that mean you need to use the pointillist style throughout the rest of your painting? So that's all of our reports. Thank you for listening.
So that's the end of our report. I hope that you lend your eyes and ears. And stay safe, sane, and God bless everyone. Bye.